The Suez Canal is considered as one of the most important canals when trading nowadays. It is as important as the Panama Canal, which is located at the other side of the world.
The Suez Canal is used to connect the Mediterranean Sea with the Gulf of Suez to the northern part of the Red Sea. The canal has a length of 160 kilometers. It is officially opened in 1869.
Even though the Suez Canal wasn't complete officially until 1869, the history of it is fascinating. In the 1200s, a different canal was built in the middle of the Nile River in Egypt to the Red Sea. However, the canal was abandoned, and finally the construction has stopped and never continued building again.
But Muhammad Ali saw this as a time where he could sort of push the Ottoman Empire aside. They had been weakening for over a century, and the Mamluks, on the other hand, he actually had them massacred at one of his citadels to sort of wipe out their influence.
In late 1700s, Napoleon Bonaparte planned to travel to Egypt because the effect of the construction of a controlled canal under French power. Napoleon believed on one hand that if this canal is constructed, it would be more convenient for the British to travel and trade with other nations through this canal. On the other hand, the British have to make a decision whether to use the same way around the South Africa, pay French duty-free. In 1799, Napoleon's canal plan to resume the construction began. The construction plan was called off after they found out about the sea levels of the Mediterranean and the Red Sea was too uneven for a canal to build.
In the mid-1800s, the French ambassador and engineer wanted to build the canal. Ismail Pasha, the Egyptian governor, was persuaded to support the building of the canal by Ferdinand de Lesseps.
Ismail Pasha fashioned himself very much in his grandfather's footprints, in that he wanted to continue this modernization process and bring Egypt into the modern world. The problem that he ended up having was all of these reforms and all of these new introductions cost a lot of money, and soon he had actually bankrupted the Egyptian economy. Now, they had borrowed so much from the West that they needed a way to raise money to pay back these debts.
In 1858, the construction was approved by the Universal Suez Ship Canal Company, which was owned by the French and Egyptian investors. On April 25, 1859, the construction of the Suez Canal officially began. And then, 10 years later, on November 17, 1869, the Suez Canal was opened. After the Suez Canal was opened, goods that were transported throughout the world made the Suez Canal have a huge impact on whole world trade. In 1875, United Kingdom forced Egypt to share its profit in ownership of the Suez Canal. Subsequently, few years later, in 1888, the canal was accessible for any nation to sail their ships. Soon afterwards, the use and the control of the canal causes out a conflict. For example, in 1936, the UK was given the right to preserve military forces in the Suez Canal zone, controlling the entrance points.
The laborers used in the Suez Canal project were known as corvée laborers. They were conscripted laborers from the peasant level of society in Egypt. They weren't really treated well. Many of them likely died on the project. And they weren't paid well for their time either, if they were paid at all. So by this time, Queen Victoria had no real direct political power due to the English monarchy being limited through the Constitution. but she did have a lot of indirect political and economic control. So now that the British had India as a colony, the British had partial ownership over the Suez Canal, which meant that they could exempt themselves from paying tariffs and taxes for passing through the area, which would reduce the cost of the goods sold, which would increase economic activity for the British. So it was a win-win situation for her to use her political and economic influence to push for the purchasing of the Suez Canal stock.
In 1950s, the US and the UK supported the Egyptian government to subsidize the Aswan High Dam. However, both nations retired their support. The Egyptian government took control of the canal in July 1956. Actually, they charged transit fees so that it will be used as a toll to pay for the dam. In view of the Suez Crisis, in October 29, 1956, Egypt was invaded by Israel, Britain, and France due to the reason of paying fee. In revenge, Egypt attacked 40 ships to barricade the canal. In November 1956, the Suez Crisis came to its end after the UN organization had organized a ceasefire between the four nations: Israel, Egypt, UK, and France. Suez Canal was opened in March 1957 after the submerged ships were all removed. All the way through 1960s to the 1970s, Egypt and Israel often have the disagreement, which leads to the problem of the canal closing often. Finally, Egypt finished with the final course of the canal in 1962. This final course is agreed to the Universal Suez Ship Canal Company, which is real owner and the nation's control of the Suez Canal by themselves.
So, as you can see from the information, the Suez Canal is very important to the world, in both the economics and the society. Without this canal, the world would be more worse. It would affect a whole lot of things. For example, it would affect the cost of the trade of the imported goods. The canal helps shorten the distance and the time of traveling, also the cost of it for trade. So, as a conclusion, you can see that the Suez Canal really has a huge impact to our world. So much that when we say the word Suez Canal, everyone will know about it.
Talk dirty to me.